This is a cappuccino made with real Italian beans, and this is an almond croissant fresh from the bakery just down the street. The whole thing sitting here in this beautiful historic square cost me about $4. And that view of the snow on the mountains, well, that's free. It's incredible to think that just 1 year ago, my entire future looked completely different. I was days away from wiring a deposit for a condo in the Philippines. I had the spreadsheets, I had the vlogs bookmarked. My retirement was supposed to be all about sandy beaches and palm trees. That was the picture I had sold myself on. And I thank God every day that I listened to my gut and hit the brakes on that plan. Because this is better. I don't just mean a little better. I mean it's better in a way that has fundamentally changed what my retirement feels like. It's safer here. It's significantly cheaper for the quality of everything you get, from the food to the apartment I live in. And maybe the most important thing, the thing I didn't even know I was looking for, is that this feels like a real life, not just a permanent vacation. It's a place where you build a routine, where you meet neighbors, where you experience 4 actual seasons. It isn't an escape from life, it's just a place to build a new one. And to think I almost missed all of this for a fantasy that wasn't even mine. To understand how I ended up here, you have to understand who I was back in Omaha, Nebraska. For 30 years, I ran my own HVAC business. I started as a technician with a bag of tools and an old van, and I built a company that people trusted. I'm a practical guy. I believe in systems that work, in numbers that add up, and in doing the job right the first time. When I retired and sold the business, I was in a solid position. After selling our house, I had a portfolio of $450,000 in savings and investments, plus a pension from my early years in the trade union that brought in another $200 a month. On paper, I was set, but my life had a hole in it that no amount of money could fill. My wife of 35 years, Sarah, had passed away 3 years earlier. The first 2 years after she was gone were just a fog. There were so many things to handle, so much paperwork, so much stuff. But after the dust settled, I was left with the silence. The house we had built our life in felt enormous and empty. My days fell into a pattern. I'd wake up, have coffee, and then spend hours in the garage tinkering with old engines. It used to be my hobby, my escape. But now it just felt like a way to make the clock move. The loneliness was a physical presence. It was a weight in the room. I knew I couldn't just sit in that quiet house and wait for the end. I had to make a change. A radical one. That's when the Philippines entered the picture. Like a lot of guys my age, I started watching YouTube videos. They painted a picture of paradise on a budget. Sunny beaches, friendly people, a life where my savings and pension would make me comfortable, even wealthy. For a man sitting in a silent house in Nebraska as winter approached, it was a powerful dream. And I approached it like I'd approach any job, with research. I built spreadsheets. I compared the cost of living in Dumaguete versus Cebu. I had vlogs bookmarked. I had forums I checked every day. I was convinced I had all the data. The Philippines wasn't just a dream, it was a well-researched plan. The plan came to a screeching halt with a single phone call. It was my friend Mark, an old colleague I'd known for decades. He was a straight shooter, a guy whose opinion I trusted. He had just come back from a 6-month test run in Cebu, the very city I was planning to move to. The guy I heard on the other end of the line didn't sound like he'd just spent half a year in paradise. He sounded exhausted. He told me about the constant draining humidity that was nothing like a pleasant summer day back home. He told me about getting his wallet lifted in a crowded market. He called it the paradise tax, the unreliable internet that made video calls with his family a nightmare, the frequent power outages, the little frustrations that just grind you down, day after day. He said the people were friendly, yes, but he always felt like an outsider, a walking ATM. The culture was just harder to break into than the vlogs ever let on. Hearing that from Mark was like getting a bucket of ice water to the face. It was new data from a trusted source, and it didn't fit my spreadsheet. I'd spent my whole life diagnosing problems. When a system is blowing hot air in the summer and cold air in the winter, you don't just ignore the signs. You stop, you reassess, and you figure out what's fundamentally wrong. My retirement plan was suddenly blowing hot air, and I knew I couldn't just move forward and hope it would fix itself. I had to pause and re-examine the entire blueprint. That phone call with Mark left me spinning. It was like I'd spent a year building an elaborate machine, and he had just pointed out a fatal flaw in the engine. My entire plan was built on the idea of a tropical paradise, and he was telling me the reality was a constant, grinding frustration. For a few days, I was just adrift. I stopped looking at my spreadsheets. I stopped watching the vlogs. I was back at square one, and it felt worse than when I started, because now I didn't even have a dream to hold on to. One night, I couldn't sleep. I was just sitting in the living room, the house completely silent, and I typed something into Google I never thought I would. Safest, cheapest retirement countries. The usual suspects popped up: Portugal, Panama, Mexico. But then I saw an article that mentioned Eastern Europe. My first thought was exactly what you're probably thinking. Gray, concrete, Soviet-era blocks, cold, grim, and depressing. I almost clicked away, but then I saw a thumbnail for a travel video. It was a drone shot of a town square that looked like it was straight out of a fairy tale. The title was, "This is Brasov, Romania." I clicked it, and for the next hour, everything I thought I knew got turned on its head. I saw these vibrant, clean cities with stunning medieval architecture. I saw mountains that reminded me of Colorado. I saw modern cafes, people my age sitting outside, and an energy that felt nothing like the gloomy picture in my head. A little spark of hope came back. Maybe there was another way. As a guy who spent his life running a business, the numbers have to work. A feeling isn't enough. So I did what I do best. I built a new spreadsheet. On one side, I had Cebu, based on my year of research. On the other, I had Brasov, based on this new rabbit hole I was diving into. And the figures I saw, they honestly surprised me. I had budgeted $700 a month for a decent modern condo in Cebu. In Brasov, a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in a new building, with a balcony and a view, was about $500. That's a $200 savings right there, every single month. Then I looked at safety. I'm not a fearful guy, but after Mark's story about getting his wallet lifted, it was on my mind. I looked up the International Crime Index scores. Romania's scores weren't just good. They were comparable to places like Spain or Italy. That felt solid. That felt like a system with good bones. And then, the clincher, infrastructure. My friend Mark's biggest complaint was the unreliable internet and power. I discovered Romania has some of the fastest, most reliable internet in the entire world. For a guy who wants to stay connected with family back home, that was a huge deal. The healthcare was another point. He'd told me horror stories about trying to find a good doctor. In Romania, I found I could get high-quality private health insurance that met EU standards for about $150 a month. It all just seemed functional. The idea of 4 distinct seasons, of cool autumns and real winters, suddenly sounded more appealing than a year-round oppressive humidity. It felt like a real life, not a permanent vacation. A spreadsheet is one thing. Reality is another. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice and commit to a place sight unseen. I booked a 1-month scouting trip for that October. I wanted to see it for myself, to kick the tires. I spent a week in the capital, Bucharest, which was busy and interesting, but not for me. Then I took the train to Cluj-Napoca, and finally to Brasov. And that's when it clicked. The air was crisp and clean. The mountains were right there. I was amazed at how many young people spoke perfect English, and they were happy to help. I used ride-sharing apps that were just as efficient as anything back home. I went into the supermarkets and was blown away by the quality of the fresh bread, the produce, the cheese. One day, I felt a cold coming on. It was the perfect test. I walked into a local pharmacy, a place called a pharmacy. I was expecting a language barrier, confusion, a hassle. Instead, a woman in a crisp white coat asked me in flawless English what my symptoms were. She was professional, knowledgeable. She sold me some medicine that knocked the cold out in 2 days, and the whole transaction cost me maybe $5. It was so simple, so efficient, so normal. It was the complete opposite of the paradise tax Mark had described. That was the moment. That was when the spreadsheet and the reality locked into place. I flew back to Omaha with a decision made. This wasn't a fantasy I was chasing anymore. This was a logical plan. I put the house on the market and it sold faster than I expected. With the proceeds and my savings secure, I started the visa process. I applied for a Romanian long-stay visa, and because I could easily prove my pension and my savings, the process was surprisingly straightforward. There were forms to fill out, documents to gather, but it was a clear system. And if there's one thing I trust, it's a system that works. 3 months later, my visa was approved. My life in Nebraska was packed into boxes, and I was on a one-way flight to my new home. Landing in Romania for good felt different than the scouting trip. The first time, I was an inspector. This time, I was home. I remember taking the train from Bucharest up to Brașov, watching the landscape change from flat plains to rolling hills, and finally, to the sharp, dramatic peaks of the Carpathians. There wasn't any anxiety. For the first time since Sarah passed, I felt a sense of calm, a feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That feeling only grew when I moved into my apartment. It's a one-bedroom in a brand-new building, just a 15-minute walk from the old town square. It has a small balcony where I drink my coffee in the morning, looking out at the mountains. It's modern, it's warm, it's quiet, and it costs me $500 a month. That's not a special deal, that's just the price. Those first few weeks were a quiet joy. I wasn't on vacation, I was building a life. I went to the grocery store, the Piatta, and learned the words for the things I wanted. I bought a SIM card for my phone, $10 for a month of service with more data than I could ever use. Every transaction was simple, efficient. There was no paradise tax. The power stayed on. The internet was faster than anything I ever had in Omaha. Every day was a small confirmation that my spreadsheet hadn't lied to me. The system here just works. But a man can't live on a spreadsheet. My biggest fear about retiring wasn't about money. It was about the silence. I knew I couldn't just trade my empty house in Nebraska for an empty apartment in Romania. I had to build a community. So I started walking. Every morning, I'd walk through the forest trails at the base of Mount Tampa, and I started seeing the same faces. A nod becomes a bună dimineața, which means good morning. Soon I was talking to a couple of Romanian guys my age. Their English was limited, my Romanian was worse, but we managed. They told me about a local hiking group that went out every Saturday. Joining that group changed everything. It's a mix of people, Romanians who have lived here their whole lives, and a handful of other expats, a British guy, a German woman. We're not a bunch of retirees sitting around complaining. We're out there, in the mountains, sometimes hiking for 5 or 6 hours. After, we'll find a little restaurant and have a huge, hearty lunch that costs maybe $15. We talk about everything, from politics to our grandkids. I'm not just the American guy anymore. I'm David. I'm the one who knows a thing or two about fixing things. I found my people. And the loneliness that felt like it was going to swallow me whole back in Omaha, it's just gone. 8 months in, my life isn't just cheaper, it's fuller. My life in Romania is a direct result of a system that works. But for a while there, my system was completely broken. That phone call with Mark didn't just plant a seed of doubt. It took a wrecking ball to the entire foundation of my retirement plan. For a solid year, I had poured my energy, my hopes, into this one single idea: the Philippines. It was going to be my reward, my escape from the quiet, gray life I had in Omaha. And in one 20-minute conversation, that whole picture shattered. For a few days, I was just adrift. I stopped looking at my spreadsheets. I stopped watching the vlogs. The silence in the house felt louder than ever, because now I didn't even have a dream to fill it with. It's a terrible feeling, to be at the starting line all over again. Only this time you're more tired and you don't even know which direction to run. One night, I was sitting in the living room, the house completely dark, and I just couldn't stand the quiet anymore. I opened my laptop and typed something into Google I never thought I would. Safest, cheapest retirement countries. The usual suspects popped up: Portugal, Panama, Mexico. But then I saw an article that mentioned Eastern Europe. My first thought was exactly what you're probably thinking. Gray, concrete, Soviet-era blocks. Cold, grim, and depressing. I almost clicked away. To me, a guy who spent his life fixing things, it sounded like a system that was fundamentally broken. But then I saw a thumbnail for a travel video. It was a drone shot of a town square that looked like it was straight out of a fairy tale. The buildings were painted in vibrant pastel colors. The title was, "This is Brasov, Romania." I clicked it. And for the next hour, everything I thought I knew got turned completely on its head. I saw these clean, beautiful cities with stunning medieval architecture. I saw mountains that reminded me of my trips to Colorado. I saw modern cafes, people my age sitting outside, laughing, and an energy that felt nothing like the gloomy picture I had in my head. For the first time in days, a little spark of hope came back. Maybe there was another way. But as a guy who spent his life running a business, a feeling isn't enough. The numbers have to work. So I did what I do best. I built a new spreadsheet. On one side, I had Cebu, based on my year of research. On the other, I had Brasov, based on this new rabbit hole I was diving into. And the figures I saw, they honestly surprised me. I had budgeted $700 a month for a decent modern condo in Cebu. In Brasov, I was finding beautiful one-bedroom apartments in new buildings with balconies and mountain views for about $500 a month. That's a $200 savings right there, every single month. In HVAC terms, that's just better efficiency. Then I looked at safety. I'm not a fearful guy, but after Mark's story about getting his wallet lifted, it was on my mind. I looked up the International Crime Index scores. Romania's scores weren't just good. They were significantly lower than the Philippines, and even comparable to places like Spain or Italy. That felt solid. That felt like a system with good bones. And then, the clincher, infrastructure. My friend Mark's biggest complaint, the thing that really wore him down, was the paradise tax, the unreliable internet and the frequent power outages. It's like having a brand new air conditioner on a faulty circuit. It doesn't matter how good the unit is if the system supporting it keeps failing. I discovered Romania has some of the fastest, most reliable internet in the entire world. For a guy who wants to stay connected with family back home, that was a huge deal. The healthcare was another point. He told me horror stories about trying to find a good doctor he could trust. In Romania, I found out I could get high-quality private health insurance that met European Union standards for about $150 a month. It all just seemed functional. The idea of 4 distinct seasons, of cool autumns and real winters with snow on the mountains, suddenly sounded so much more appealing than a year-round, oppressive humidity. It felt like a real life, not a permanent vacation I might get tired of. Of course, a spreadsheet is one thing. Reality is another. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice and commit to a place sight unseen. I'd learned my lesson. You have to kick the tires. I booked a 1-month scouting trip for that October. I wanted to see it for myself, to feel it. I spent a week in the capital, Bucharest, which was busy and interesting, but a bit too big city for me. Then I took the train north to Cluj-Napoca and finally to Brasov. And that's when it clicked. I got off the train and the air was just different. It was crisp and clean. The mountains were right there, looming over the town like old friends. I was amazed at how many young people spoke perfect English, and they weren't just trying to sell you something. They were just genuinely happy to help. I used ride-sharing apps that were just as efficient as anything back home and cost a couple of bucks to get anywhere. I went into the supermarkets, the Kauflands and the Lidls, and I was blown away by the quality of the fresh bread, the produce, the cheese. The real test came about 2 weeks in. I felt a cold coming on, sore throat, runny nose, the whole deal. It was the perfect opportunity to test the system. I walked into a local pharmacy, a place they call a pharmacy. I was expecting a language barrier, a hassle, maybe some mystery medicine. Instead, a woman in a crisp white coat asked me in flawless English what my symptoms were. She was professional, knowledgeable, and patient. She sold me some medicine that knocked the cold out in 2 days, and the whole transaction cost me maybe $5. It was so simple, so efficient, so normal. It was the complete opposite of the paradise tax Mark had described. That was the moment. That was when the spreadsheet and the reality locked into place. I knew this was a system I could trust. I flew back to Omaha with a decision made. This wasn't a fantasy I was chasing anymore. This was a logical, practical plan. This was me being the guy I've always been, a problem solver. I put the house on the market, and it sold faster than I expected in the fall market. With the proceeds and my savings secure, I started the visa process. I applied for a Romanian long-stay visa, and because I could easily prove my pension of $200 a month and my savings, the process was surprisingly straightforward. There were forms to fill out, documents to gather from the bank, a background check to be done. But it was a clear system with clear rules. And if there's one thing I trust, it's a system that works. 3 months later, my visa was approved. I sold my old van, donated the furniture I wasn't taking, and packed the rest of my life into 2 large suitcases. I was on a one-way flight to my new home, leaving the silence of that house in Nebraska behind for good. I had the wire transfer form from the bank sitting on my desk. It was already filled out. 72 hours after I sent that, a piece of my retirement, a big piece, would be locked into a pre-construction condo with a sea view in Cebu. My master spreadsheet was open on the screen. All the cells were green. Positive cash flow projections for the next 20 years. The system worked. I had done the research for a full year. I was proud of it. Then the phone rang. The screen said it was Mark. I picked up, ready to give him a hard time, ask him if he'd gotten a tan for me. But the voice on the other end wasn't the Mark I knew. It was thin, exhausted. "Don't do it, Dave," he said. There was no hello, no small talk, just those 4 words. "Don't send the money." I asked him what he was talking about. He let out this short, dry laugh that had no humor in it. "Cebu? It's a beautiful country. It's a great place to spend a week. But living here, it grinds you down." He told me about the heat, not the pleasant warmth you see in the travel vlogs. A heavy, wet heat that never leaves your skin. A heat that saps your energy by 9 in the morning. He told me about walking through a crowded market, a slight bump in the chaos, a hand, quick as a snake, in his pocket. His wallet was gone, just like that. Credit cards, his driver's license, $200 in cash he'd just pulled from the machine. Vanished. He went to the police. They just shrugged. One of them actually smiled and said, "Welcome to the Philippines." He talked about the internet. It would cut out in the middle of a video call with his daughter, the screen just freezing on her worried face. The power would go out 3 times in a week, leaving him in his condo, in the dark, sweating, with nothing to do but sit there and wait for it to come back on. He called it the paradise tax. The little things. The constant grinding friction of a system that just doesn't quite work, day after day after day. "The people are friendly," he said, and his voice dropped. "Everyone smiles. But you're always on the outside, man. You're the rich American. You're the guy with the money. You're a walking ATM." I was just sitting there, in my quiet house in Omaha, staring at my spreadsheet. The numbers on the screen didn't mean anything anymore. They were just pixels. They were a fantasy. I heard the low hum of the refrigerator. I heard the ticking of the clock on the wall. The silence in the house was deafening. After we hung up the phone, I sat in that chair for an hour. Maybe longer. I didn't move. I just stared at that wire transfer form on my desk, a piece of paper that represented a future I had built entirely in my own head. A future that had just been completely and totally dismantled in a 20-minute phone call. The system wasn't just flawed, The entire blueprint was for the wrong building. I picked up the form, tore it right down the middle, and then tore the pieces again. My plan was gone. I was back at square one, alone in the silence. And I had absolutely no idea what to do next. So this is my life now, 8 months in. That quiet, empty house in Omaha feels like a lifetime ago. My total monthly budget for everything, rent on this great apartment, utilities, fantastic food, my hiking trips, all of it, comes in around $1,800, and I promise you, I am not cutting corners. I'm living well. And the loneliness, that feeling that used to be a heavy blanket I couldn't shake off, it's just gone. I found a community here, on the trails of Mount Tampa. We're not just a bunch of expats sitting around complaining. We're out there, in the mountains, living. And that feeling, that's worth more than any spreadsheet. Looking back at that wire transfer form sitting on my desk, ready to be sent, I realize how close I came to making a huge mistake. It's not because the Philippines is a bad place. It's because I was asking the wrong questions. If you're thinking about making a move like this, I have 3 pieces of advice for you, learned the hard way. First, don't just follow the YouTube herd. The most popular expat spots are popular for a reason, but that also means they're getting crowded and expensive, and the wear and tear is starting to show. I got so fixated on Cebu because that's what all the algorithms were showing me. My advice is to look for the next country, not the one everyone is already in. The best value, the most authentic experience, is usually one step ahead of the crowd. Second, you have to distinguish between a vacation and a life. A beach is great for 2 weeks, but living there is a different animal. You have to be brutally honest about what you need, 365 days a year. For me, it was safety, 4 distinct seasons, and first world infrastructure. A beach wasn't on that list. It's like an HVAC system. You can have a beautiful house, but if the ductwork is bad and the power is faulty, you're never going to be comfortable. I needed a life with good bones, and a tropical beach just wasn't the right foundation for me. And third, your scouting trip should be a life test, not a vacation. Don't just see the tourist sites. Go to the supermarket on a Tuesday morning. Try to mail a package at the post office. Go get a local SIM card for your phone. And if you have to, see a doctor for a minor issue. How you feel doing those boring, everyday things will tell you everything you need to know. When I walked into that pharmacy here in Brasov and got my cold medicine so easily, from a professional who spoke perfect English, that one experience told me more about my future life here than a week of sightseeing ever could. Look, the Philippines is a beautiful country, and for a lot of people, it's the perfect fit. But it wasn't the right fit for me. My advice is this: before you book that one-way ticket to the place everyone on YouTube is talking about, do yourself a favor. Open another browser tab and start researching the places they aren't talking about. Your perfect retirement might be where you least expect to find it. If you're tired of the same old retirement advice and want more real stories about building a great life abroad, subscribe to the channel.